Well, now that Mom's here, we're ready to go. We just delayed everything until you got here. Okay, I have a bifurcated Bible class this morning. Two different things. They're unrelated, but both of them I wanted to talk about. So one of them is about a radical moral truth. Since this week has been Life Sunday, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And then the other is a little bit about worship. And I'm going to start with a little bit about worship. Generally speaking, in the worship service, you have two movements. You have movements from God to us. You have movements from us to God. Sometimes they don't divide up neatly. Sometimes you might think that that's kind of going both ways. But conceptually, there's times when God is sharing and giving to us. Or maybe I put it this way, there are times when God is serving us. And then there are times when we are going to God or offering our service to God. Either way, we're talking about service, which is why the preferred way of speaking about the worship service is a divine service. Divine service is an ambiguous expression. Divine means God. Service of God. And it's ambiguous because you can't tell by that English expression whether it's God doing the serving us or we're doing the serving of God. But in worship, actually, it goes both ways. God is serving us. He is serving us with His Word and Holy Spirit. He is serving us with His body and blood. He is serving us with His presence. He is here to help and strengthen His people. So divine service really does have that sense that God's people gather together for God to feed and take care of us. But it is also an opportunity for us to come to our God, to gather around Him, offer to Him our prayers and our praise, what we call the sacrifice of thanksgiving. In thanksgiving for what He has done for us, well, we offer Him back this. One of the weaknesses of the way English speakers speak of this is we talk about worship, and usually when we're talking about worship, we're talking almost exclusively about what we're giving to God, okay? That's not wrong, it's just incomplete. So when we gather together here to worship, if the primary thought you have is we're doing the worshiping, that's only half right. Yes, we are the only ones doing the worshiping in that sense, but both we are serving God and God is serving us. It's a two-way thing. So in this two-way street, this dialogue back and forth, we have elements that we will call sacramental and elements that we'll call sacrificial. Sacrificial, as you might expect, are things where what we are giving to God, okay? Our prayers, our praise, our obedience, our attention, all of that, we are here, our time, we are here before the Lord, offering to Him what He deserves, and He is worthy of this. Then there's the sacramental part, and that should be easy to remember because when you think of the sacrament, you're thinking of the Lord's Supper, and that's something that God gives us. But you can also think of just sacramental elements of the service, all parts of those service where the blessing is coming from God and going to us. So, for example, the readings of the Word are sacramental. God is talking to us, okay? Those aren't our prayers to Him. Those are His words to us. So that would be a sacramental element of the worship service. Now, when you look at the service, there are sacramental and sacrificial elements. Typically, so we'll set that aside just for one moment. Second thing that I want to talk about is the pastor's role in the leading of a worship service, the position that he is in. And it's a mediating position, which means that I am, in one sense, a representative of the congregation going to God on behalf of all of us. In another sense, I am a representative of Christ coming to you. okay? So I'm fulfilling both of those roles depending on what's going on. So understand that I myself am a member of the congregation like you. So when I'm speaking to you on behalf of God, I'm also speaking to myself on behalf of God. My voice is Christ's tool, but I'm the one that needs to listen to this, okay? And so when I'm going to God on behalf of us, that includes me also, all right? So think about in the prayers, I'm offering up the prayers, but those aren't my personal prayers. Those are the prayers of all the congregation, and they all together go up to God, okay? Now, so you have this sacrificial, sacramental element of the service, and then you have the pastor in this mediating role, representing Christ in some regards, representing the congregation in some regards. Now, let's talk about the posture of the pastor, what I am doing. Here I have been somewhat sloppy. Sloppy in the sense that a lot of what I've done in my posture, how I'm facing, for example, has largely been focused from a long time ago on facing the congregation as often as possible to encourage speaking and encourage singing and so on like that. But this has led to some things where, that's just really not the way it's supposed to be if you really analyze what's happening in the worship service. What is supposed to be, if you look at the rubrics and see, where am I supposed to be standing, what am I supposed to be doing, and why, typically, during those sacrificial elements of the service, I should be facing the altar and not you, okay? Because I'm gathering up all of you, and we are all talking to God. I'm not talking to you, and you are talking to God over my shoulder, but instead we're all doing this together. But I haven't been very consistent about that. So I was going to make those changes this morning. It's not going to be dramatic. The service is the same as it's always been, but you're going to see that there are going to be times when I'm going to be facing a different direction than you're accustomed to, and that's the reason why, is because it just seems to me that I ought to be more consistent with this. So, for example, when we get to the beginning of the worship service, the intro, it is a prayer. And as a prayer, I shouldn't be facing you and leading you in prayer, but I should be facing the altar, and all of us should be going to God in prayer. Same way with the Kyrie, same way with the Gloria. On behalf of all of us, I'm saying, glory be to God on high. And we're all together singing. So you're going to see me, and I'm going to have my back to you. And the reason why I'm going to do that is not because I'm just tired of all of you, but because that's how I should. So when you see me with my back to you, what I want you to think about is I am representing the congregation. This is all of us together, okay? Rather than this is him doing his thing, and then we'll wait till it's our turn. This is all of us coming together, okay? You'll see other movements. I'm going to begin the service down here. So the confession and absolution goes back and forth. Now here, I have been consistent. I do face the altar when we are confessing. I will probably kneel this morning. I stopped kneeling once upon a time, and the reason why I did that is because my knees were bothering me. But it was a temporary thing, but after that I just... But the thing is, if we had kneelers, we would all be kneeling. When it comes to the confession, we would all be kneeling, but we don't have kneelers, okay? So I kneel, but when I kneel, I'm kneeling on behalf of everybody, okay? Then we're all offering our confession. And then I'm down here. And then, of course, I'm facing you for the absolution. And then, okay, and then we move, that ends what's called the preparatory part of the service. We're sort of gathered, thinking about why we're here, thinking about our worthiness to be here, focusing on the fact that we're not worthy to be here, but Christ has made us worthy. Now, having done that, then I'm going to move from here. So for the intro, I'm going to step up these steps, okay, and into this area, which is the chancel. The service divides into two parts, the service of the Word and the service of the sacrament. This is a very ancient division of the worship service, by the way, so this is nothing innovative here. This is just how the Christian church has been doing from time immemorial. So I will move into the chancel. So in a sense, you're thinking, the closer I'm getting to the altar, the more holy and important this is. So once I'm up in the chancel area, we're sort of officially in the business. We're no longer preparing. We are in the business of offering to God our prayers and receiving back his gifts. So the service of the Word will go all the way through the prayers. Okay, so from the time of the introit, all the way through the readings, the sermon, the creed, the prayers are all the service of the word. So I will be facing you when I'm doing the readings, okay, facing you during the sermon, but facing away from you for the creed, because that's all of us confessing together to God what we believe. The introit, I'll be facing away. The collect, I'm going to turn to you, okay? The Lord be with you, and also with you. The salutation is always, I'm facing you, because we're talking to one another there, and then I'm going to turn, and then we're going to have a prayer, okay? And, okay, so the whole service up to and including the prayers, so that's going to be another unusual thing, is the prayers, I'm going to have my back to you. You'll hear me just the same. And you shouldn't be looking at me anyway, okay? So you shouldn't even notice. You're all deep in prayer yourself, so you wouldn't even notice. Oh, would you have your back? You won't admit it, but you noticed. Yeah.
Like the altar being, did you go on
I'm done. I'm going there next. Okay, one of the things that I'm wanting to do is to draw a nice distinction between the service of the word and the service of the sacrament. Traditionally, altars were not moved away from the wall, okay? Now, they have been, but this has become more common in churches in the last few hundred years, but it wasn't unknown before that. The altar, the priest would not necessarily go behind the altar. His back would be to you the entire time, okay? But that's not what we're going to do. So what's going to happen is, when we get to the service of the sacrament, then I'm going to move behind the altar. Now at this point, we can do double duty. So there are parts of the service of the sacrament that are sacrificial. So I should be facing you. Well, I will be facing you, okay? There are parts that are, sacrificial. I should be facing the altar. Well, I will be facing the altar, but it'll be between me and you. Typically, you'll see me looking down, okay? But if I'm looking up, then I'm talking to you, okay? So this is how, but I'll be behind the altar. What we'll have is, I'm going to finish the prayers, and then I'm going to turn to you. And I'm going to have, we had this last week, I had a prayer, and I put that in there on purpose, and I want to continue to do that. A prayer where we finish up the prayers of the church, and we start turning our attention to the sacrament. And the prayer is for God to grant us His Holy Spirit and strengthen us and have a worthy communion and all of that. It's an invitation to come to communion. It's marking the boundary. We're moving now from the service of the sacrament, the word, to the service of the sacrament. I'll finish that prayer. Then while we're singing the offertory, create in me a clean heart, I will go behind the altar, take the veil off the elements and prepare the elements, and proceed with the service just as we've done it before. And I will do that all the way until we get to the Nunc Dimittis. The Nunc Dimittis I will do behind the altar, put all that together. But then I will come out again. I will remain up there, but I'll come out, and we'll give thanks to the Lord for He is good. It's sort of a back and forth, and it's sort of a call to pray. I'll turn my back on you again, because we're offering up a prayer of thanksgiving for Holy Communion. When that's finished, then I'll come down here. We'll sing and have the benediction from down here. So the actual the things that we're going to say, the things that we're going to do are the same. I'm just pointing out that I'm going to be doing some things differently. What I'm really doing is just doing what I should be doing all along if I was doing it properly, okay? But have done it differently, largely going back to the days when we had very few people in the pews, and it was just like having my back turned to you was already hard enough to hear you. So it was the temptation, well, it wasn't the temptation. The desire was, if I'm talking to you, I'm leading you, it's just easier to keep the volume up, okay? But we don't need to do that now, okay? Any questions on this? Yeah.
I don't know which service we're doing today, but the Gloria in Excelsis, usually you're back there. Is that going to be any different, or is that going to be?
No, I'll have my back to you.
Oh, I missed that part. I'm sorry.
Right, because that's in part because we haven't got to the service of the sacrament yet.
Okay.
And that is a prayer of praise, okay, which I'm offering on behalf of everybody, okay? So I'm just trying to be a little bit more consistent there. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I said, well, there's no time like the present. So there really won't be any difference in how the worship service goes. It's just that when you notice that I'm facing a different way than I normally would, that's why, okay? I'm not confused. Well, I might be confused, but that's not the evidence for it. Okay, so if there's no further questions on that, we'll just proceed with the service, and I expect that that will all go very smoothly. All right, let's see. Now what I wanted to talk about. We had the March for Life, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about just life issues in general. There was an interesting comment. Somebody was interviewed, and the question was, now that Roe v. Wade is no longer the law of the land, why the continued, marches? And I liked the response, because the response was basically, well, I mean, the battle is hardly over, and we really have to win the hearts of people. And this is true. Okay? The battle was never in the courts. I mean, that was sort of a preliminary, necessary thing to do, but that's not where the battle is going to be won. The battle is going to be won by changing people's minds. And I will point out further, it's not going to be changing people's minds about abortion or euthanasia or many other things that we might pile into this. You can't fight these battles at that level. Once you get to that level, the die is cast. Somebody is either going to be comfortable with abortion or they're not. And the reason they're going to be comfortable with abortion is other reasons than the thing itself. So it's those other reasons. It's the thing that we really need to reach people. If we're going to try to convince people to change their hearts and minds about these sorts of things, the question is, what is it that we're trying to reach them with? Okay? That if we win here, the other will take care of itself. Because that is what we have to do. Or at least that's how the battle is going to be fought. Okay? So this involves a core moral truth. That if you have this truth, then if you can apply consistent moral reasoning to this moral truth, you will come up with reasonable answers. But if you don't have this moral truth, all bets are off, okay? The moral truth is not something that should shock any of you. I certainly hope not. But here's what it is. A human being is a creation of God, made in his image, broken but redeemable, and the object of God's love. We could tinker with this. We could add some things. We could take some things out. The point is, we are making a statement about what a human being is. And the problem with our society today is that we do not have a grasp on what a human being is. And if you don't have a grasp on what a human being is, where you're going to come out, not just on the issue of abortion, but the issue of all kinds of things.
You don't know what a woman is. You don't know what a human is.
Well, but I mean, that's part of the problem is the reason why you don't know what a woman is because you don't know what a human is. Okay? That's why. If you can't say the one, and that's why, I mean, you probably get the impression sometimes, ecologists in ecology, on the one sense you say, well, we want to take care, animal cruelty is terrible, and we want to take care of the environment and all of that. But you do see that sometimes this seems to be going in a place where you just can't fathom this, where it seems like they would just want to turn over the world to the animals, and the human beings need to blast off from Mars or something like that. And indeed, some of the thought is like that human beings are, for some reason or another, we're not supposed to be here. We're not a part of this. And now you just kind of intuitively see that when you realize, wait a minute, aren't we a part of this? Apparently not. So there you have a good clue that we've just gone overboard. Okay, there is an important place in Christian theology for ecology and the management of the world and the wild and animals and decency to animals and all of that kind of stuff. There certainly is. But you can't avoid this fact that in Christian theology, human life is superior to other life. This is a core truth. It's superior because human beings alone are made in the image of God, and God takes special notice and care. We simply can't say that about other animals. It doesn't mean that God doesn't care about the other animals or that we can do with them whatever we want. It's just to say it is a core moral truth that God has specially created human beings, and they are of special interest to him. Okay? So when I say coral, let me use another expression. Children, oftentimes you'll say, do this. And they'll say, why? And then you'll say, well, because this. And then they'll say, well, why that? And then you'll say, well, because this. And then they'll say, well, why that? And where does this end? Because I said so, okay? Because I said so. There's a certain, because I said so is the children's equivalent of what we'll call a brute fact. Okay, a brute fact is just a thing. It's a thing that has no explanation. It needs no explanation. It just is, okay? And this isn't so much that God has spoken, although when God speaks, that's a brute fact. But the fact that human beings are a special creation of God and sacred to him is a brute fact. Which means it doesn't matter what other thing you come up with. It doesn't matter what other rationale you have. It doesn't matter where you're coming at this or how genuine you are or why you want to see it differently. If whatever you're doing contradicts this core fact that human beings are special creations of God, objects of his love, and are going to be protected, you are wrong. Because there's no further but why. Why don't animals have the same right? Animals don't have the same rights. Why are human beings important? I don't understand. They're just like animals. We were just kicked up from the dust. Well, they weren't kicked up from the dust, and they're not just like animals, and that's a brute fact. It's just okay. So that shouldn't surprise you. This is the fight. It's convincing human. Now, don't be confused by the theological language. It can be more vague. We're going to know more precisely what we mean by God and the image of God and all of that. And it may be that somebody out there who's not a Christian is simply not going to buy this language, and I understand that, and the only way we can really get them on board is to bring them to God, and then they can be thoroughly understand what the issue is. But even if they're not fully on board with God or even partially on board with God, you might nevertheless be able to persuade them that human beings stand in a unique position. But you got to do that. If you do that, then you're going to head off a lot of mischief later on when we start deciding whether old people should be permitted to die with dignity or whether we should call out amongst the babies those who are not going to be fed or whatever ideas that people may have, that they will have sort of a highfalutin idea for why to do that sounds good and right. All right, so let's talk a little bit further about this. This is the core thing we need to convince people of, that human beings, and the only way to do this really thoroughly is to connect this with God. So there is a sense in which if a person simply doesn't believe in God, they are not going to understand a human being properly. Okay, nevertheless, you're not going to make headway to tell somebody you can't just choose to have an abortion because you want to, unless you have previously persuaded them that human life is somehow important for some reason. They're just not going to do it, okay? All right, so that this first statement is true, that we're special creations of God in his image, it follows that human life must be protected, which is what the fifth commandment is about. Human life must be protected, okay? And that here's another sort of core truth. Human flourishing is good. Human suffering is not good. Okay? Human flourishing is a good thing. It's a thing that we ought to be pursuing. And protecting life is a thing that we ought to do. Now, there are many people who will readily agree with this, even people who are not Christian. They will readily agree that those are good things. But it's going to get trickier. Let's just look at this. Basically, for a human being to flourish, I mean, very fundamentally, we all have to have a proper operating system loaded into us, okay? I'll call it our heritage, culture, language, all the things that you need. I mean, which parents have to give, or somebody's got to give. A child is wired, but nevertheless not programmed, okay? So we've got our hard wiring, but we don't have an operating system. Well, a child needs to be taught language, culture, customs, basics of right and wrong and things like that, okay? And that gets handed down from previous generations and funneled through parents, and that's one of the primary duties of parents and teachers and elders to pass on to the next generation a proper operating system to our kids, okay? So we need that. We also need, in order to flourish, a family. Now, whether it's the nuclear family or some substitute if the nuclear family breaks apart or never happen, but we all need people who are close, that we have a deep love for and are very, very close, that we take care of one another, okay? We cannot all be wards of the state. We cannot be wards of the community. The community doesn't care about you and me individually. It's not possible. But we need somebody in our lives who knows us deeply, knows us personally, and cares about us deeply, and we need to have such people in our lives for a human being to flourish. Now, it is possible for a human being to live without that. I guess you can be dumped off in the wilderness and be raised by wolves. I guess you'll live, maybe, but this is not human flourishing. For a human being to flourish, we need to have a core of people who love us deeply and as unconditionally as can be, and that we know that we have that in our life. We need to have a certain amount of material security. It's just that simple. Got to have a certain amount of food, a certain amount of shelter, or someplace to get it. I mean, this is really obvious, but this is required. Okay, so if we're going to be serious that human life needs to be protected and in order to flourish, then we're saying that's what a human being needs. When I say community protection, what I mean is we need the protection of the law and justice. Okay? It can't just be every person for himself or every family for themselves. If my life is to flourish, I have to have some protection from the larger community out there that says, no, you can't kill him. No, you can't take it. You can't starve him to death. You can't put him in a cage. All right, so when you look at these are really the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th commandments. It's really what they are. Which is just really describing the things that human beings need in this sinful world in order to get along, in order to survive. All right, now, thus far, there's very few people that disagree with this. Okay, but here's where it's going to get, this is where Christianity made an enormous change. Okay? Because most of this is pretty common sense, actually. It's this. It's not some, not most, but every human life. This is the thing where Christianity made an enormous difference. The Roman Empire would have said, oh yeah, everything, all that's true right up until I just put this here. In the ancient world, everybody understood that human life was important, sacred in some fashion or another, but they were talking more about the community, the human race, or the swells, the important people, the philosophers, or whoever it is. They did not mean every last person. There were a lot of people in the ancient world that were thoroughly disposable. Thoroughly disposable. Now, in the ancient world, well, in the Roman Empire, exposure was a common thing to do with unwanted children. If the children were unwanted primarily because they had some kind of a defect, but not even necessarily that, it's just the family couldn't afford them, they would leave them by the side of the road. Or just leave them somewhere. Okay. The thing that happened is that first, in the early Christian church, Christians started taking these babies in, which seems strange to people. Okay, because we're not talking about taking your own baby in. We're talking about you're just taking a strange kid. Just a strange baby. But from the Christian point of view, this is a child created by God in his image. That life is sacred. The Roman world did not consider that life important. It was a drag on society. If somebody wants to take it, that's fine. There was absolutely no social safety net. That wasn't even thought about. But even the question as to whether anybody owed a duty to that child, the Christians thought so. And as the Christian church grew, pressure on society to change their attitudes toward children. So that, in other words, rather than just dumping your child, bring them to us. Okay? Or better yet, don't dump your child. Your child may have problems, but it's still a child. Eventually, there were enough Christians in the Roman Empire that the practice of exposing kids that were unwanted died out and went away. Okay? Because it just came to be understood by people who had not previously thought this, that this was just wrong. So they stopped doing it. But until you persuade them that a child has sort of value in itself to God, if you don't want the child and there's no place to take it, then leave it by the side of the road. Okay? That's something that makes sense to somebody in that world. You can see that the parallel to elective abortion is very, very close and tight, because we practice the same thing, except you're not allowed to do this once the child is born. But until the child is born, you can essentially, well, it's not even exposing the child, it's worse than that. But the way to win this battle is to convince people that that child is not disposable.
Question, I want to bring up a point regarding the abortion debate. A lot of times I hear people back and forth, whether abortion should be legal or illegal or whatever, but here's something that I've never heard anybody say, and that is, if a woman doesn't want to have a child, why'd she get pregnant in the first place? What did she do? She must have done something to get herself that way. And I never hear anybody talk about that point.
Well, yes. The way they do talk about it is it's a red herring, okay?
Yep.
But they will throw in the issue of rape. Because there would be an issue where a woman did not.
Yeah, there will be. I'm talking about.
And my response to that is, well, number one, women getting pregnant because of rape is a vanishingly small number. Now, if you're one of those women, that's a terrible thing. I simply admit that. But the debate should not be based on that extreme circumstance. Let's take the 95% where you got pregnant in the normal way, some kind of consensual or reasonably consensual or somewhat consensual act. Well, I mean, this is part of the moral argument, is that if a woman is pregnant and this is going to be a terrible, terrible hardship, first off, you acknowledge the hardship, but then you also say, okay, well, life is filled with hardships, and sometimes we bring the hardships on ourselves, and sometimes they're imposed from on outside, okay? But hardships are to be borne. And particularly if you created the hardship yourself or had a hand in it. One thing's for sure is the child did not have a hand in the hardship. So the child shouldn't be taken out on the child. At any rate, this goes away when a person has a healthy understanding of what a child is. If a child is a special creation of God, and God, cares about this child, well then, it's very difficult to argue that I should be able, if I wish, to discard the child. We're not talking about odd situations also, where you have a genuine situation where the woman can't bring this child to term. I mean, either it'll kill the woman or the child won't survive, or there's just something catastrophically wrong. We're not talking about that. I would consider to be a medical situation, and a very tragic medical situation, but a medical situation nevertheless. And that to me is not where the debate should be. That's not, in my view, an elective abortion. That is a human tragedy. The elective abortion is when a woman doesn't have to have an abortion, but chooses to. Okay, now, I don't really care why she chooses. If I go ahead and stipulate that she has a good reason, well, even what would appear to be a good reason to me, I would still say, life is filled with hardships, and we got to deal with them. And it might mean that that is a really very hard hardship. We got to deal with them. And the way we deal with them is what human life must be protected. It's just, remember that we talked about this some months ago? You know, the 5 people in the boat adrift? Okay? It's better for all 5 of us to die than for us to kill one of the mediums so the other 4 can live. And many people would say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't if your view is utilitarian. But if you understand that God is the author of all of our lives, we have no right to take that life, just to save mine, then it makes sense. Okay? Even though it might seem wasteful. The way to deal with this is not primarily to look at how wasteful it is, because let me tell you, there's a lot of decisions that we could make. If efficiency and not being wasteful is what we want to do, then we eliminate all the elderly, and we eliminate all the disabled, and we eliminate everybody who's a drag on society. If you can't pull your own, we eliminate you, and we will be a much more efficient society if efficiency is your thing, okay? But if we take it as a brute fact that life is to be protected because life is important to God, then it doesn't matter if it's more efficient or if I'll be happier. I'll be happier if I don't have to deal with this child. There are many children after they are born who make their parents wish that the parents were dead anyway, and you bear with that. You deal with it with as much grace and as much strength as you can get. You call upon your Lord. And if he is calling upon you to make, remember that the essence of love is the willing to sacrifice, okay? Now, it may not be you're happy to sacrifice, but in the end, if the choice is I sacrifice you or I sacrifice myself, the answer of love is I sacrifice myself. And nowhere is this clearer than when we're talking about a parent and a child, okay? If a parent will not sacrifice for their own child, then I do not know what that parent would be willing to sacrifice for. Now, the way our society deals with this is they don't want to talk about the unborn child as a child. They don't want to do that. And I understand why. The cognitive dissonance of trying to explain to somebody that abortion is a good thing and ought to be legal, while at the same time admitting that a child is an infinitely valuable thing created by God. I mean, that, I don't know how you don't hold those together. You go one way or you go the other, but you can't go both. So if your business is to make sure that this is understood as a right, then you're going to have to not address the question, what is this child? Which is, the same question is, what is a human being? Okay? So, it's every human life that makes such an enormous difference for Christianity. This is why Christians it's not only unborn that we're concerned with. Every human life means that everybody needs a family. Everybody needs this software loaded into their head, the cultural software. Everybody needs material security, and everybody needs justice. And that's what characterizes the Judeo-Christian understanding of things, is that these commands of God extend to the weakest, the poorest, everybody. Now, when you want to talk about the expense to society, well, take medical today. I don't know what the percentage is, but I'll just pick a number out of the air and you'll see my point. 75% of all medical expenses are incurred in the last 5 years of people's lives. Agree? Yeah. I don't know whether the number's right or not, but I mean, it's something like that. It's a very big number. And so in other words, an enormous amount of medical resources are being spent on people who are dying. Why on earth would we do that? Yeah, but they're close. The return on your investment is much smaller. Okay? The marginal return is gone. All right? So when you got a 30-year-old that if we can heal him, why? We got 40, 50 years of, but this person here, I mean, why would we do that? We don't do it because of utility. One reason why we might do it is because, well, I'm going to be old one day. Okay? So that's why. But that's not a Christian answer. The Christian answer is, we're going to take care of these people because although they're not useful to society and the economy, they're precious in God's sight, and therefore they must be precious to us too. So what is my point? The more you extend these things that people need, the more you extend the commandments of God to ever poorer and ever weaker and ever more disabled people, okay, the larger the burden on us all gets. but we are required to bear it. Which is why it's in Christian societies where you have things like orphanages and hospitals, and why you have massive efforts to provide for the material welfare of people who are very weak and poor and are never going to contribute back to society, and that this is just considered to be something that we should do, okay? So, this extends to the helpless, the weak, the dying, the unborn. You could make a long list of people for whom this applies to. We don't tell people when they get to a certain age, we're simply not going to admit you to the hospital if you have a problem, because you're just not going to live that much longer anyway. Now, that would be an economically intelligent decision. And if we were being run by artificial intelligence that was programmed simply to tell us the most efficient thing to do, then that's what it would do. And in fact, it would probably tell each and every one of us, artificial intelligence might be a really wonderful thing for the medical community, but imagine how it could be abused, where you go in and feed the data in, and it tells you this person is probably not going to live any longer than this, therefore they are worth this much money to put into them. Can you do a calculation like that? You can. You can, yeah. We don't, do we? Not yet, because why? Because still too many people buy off on this idea that a human being is actually a creation of God. Okay? So we get really inconsistent about this, so that there are people who are great proponents of abortion rights, but who would balk at the idea of euthanizing older people, even though the logic is virtually the same. Grandma and Grandpa are costing us an awful lot of money, and it's all downhill from here, and they would be happier anyway. I mean, it's real simple. If you just don't care about the larger principle, and if the only thing you care about is yourself, okay, well, I may be old one day. There's some people that feel that way. Okay? But somebody who feels that way might just decide that, well, I'll probably die before then, and if I don't, I'll make sure I do. There's answers to all of this, but they come to radically different conclusions if you don't care, if you don't know what a human being is. Okay? If you don't know what a human being is. So the battle in our society to have a humane society with regard to the poor, with regard to disabled people, with regard to the elderly, with regard to individuals rather than just groups of people, with regard to the unborn, with regard to people who can pull their own weight and people who can't, even with regard to criminals and what we do with criminals. I mean, at what point do we say, we're going to try to rehabilitate you, and at what point are we going to say, no, we're not? All of these are tied into the question, what is a person? Now, the idea of, that a person is a male or a female is one variation of that. The thing that people get confused about, when they're confused about that, what does that tell you immediately? They don't know what a person is. They just lost that. Because it's one of those elemental things that I could put that up there as a brute fact, okay? Human beings come in two kinds. And that's not very controversial, it never has been. You have to have a lot of degrees after your name in order to overcome that, you know that? Okay. So the battle is not going to be waged in court. If you're going to try to argue with somebody when they have a totally different understanding of what a human being is, and you're going to have an argument over abortion, I don't know what you're going to say. And it's the same thing about your attitude toward marriage or same-sex marriage or transsexual stuff or any of that. Frankly, it's the same argument when you come right down to do we pour more money into people or pour more money into animals? Or how much money do we provide for the poor and disabled? And why do we make a distinction between disabled people who can work and disabled people who can't? Okay? We make this distinction because people who cannot provide for themselves, we consider it a moral obligation, even though they will never repay society. Even though they may never have been able to. They may have been disabled from the moment of their birth, and we're going to do nothing but take care of it. Notice that in Western society, which is deeply imbued with these Christian principles, We risk life and limb on the battlefield for every individual soldier. You know the old, we don't leave one behind. But even to rescue the bodies of those who have fallen. I mean, at some point you don't. But amazing risks are taken in order to recover bodies from the battlefield because of what those bodies were. Okay? That life, every life, not just life in general, not just the nation, but each specific life is entitled to these things because God loves each life and wants every life to flourish. Okay? That is our Christian heritage, loud and clear, although people don't realize it. Okay? I'm not going to be talking about abortion or life issues particularly in the sermon, but I am going to address that question as to how much of our society is profoundly Christian, though people do not realize it. They have no idea. But you go to China and you find out it's a very different world there. Okay? They still expose baby. Well, they don't anymore. Well, they still do out in the countryside. That the people may have a very different idea about the worth of a child. There are a lot more boys in China now than there are girls. Do you know why?
One-child policy.
Yeah, they had a one-child policy, and the people just valued having boys. So the girls, they either aborted or exposed for decades. In this country, you'd like to think that would never happen. It's a lot closer to happening now than it used to be. But there's a reason why you and I would look at that and say, who could think that way? Well, they wouldn't think that way if it was a society that has, I mean, even if it's no longer outwardly Christian, if it had that kind of foundation, it would never think that way to begin with. Okay? So these things have a huge effect, even on unbelievers. Unbelievers are profoundly affected. Well, again, like I said, so much of our society owes a deep indebtedness to Christianity, even the atheists. They don't realize it, but they do. Okay. Oh, yeah, that, yeah. We're going to find out it goes even deeper than that. It goes even deeper than that.
Still reading the papers.
Yeah, that's right. Some have said that our society, though it's turning away from God, is doing as well as it is because we're surviving on the fumes from previous generations. But the fumes are going to run out here pretty soon. And we're not going to have any vestiges left if we keep going in this direction. And then what would society look like? Okay, and the answer is, I have no idea. I don't want to live in it. Okay. All right, well, anyway, that's our bifurcated Bible study for this morning. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for your love, and we thank you for the wisdom that teaches us, oh Lord, this fundamental truth about life. We are here because you made us, and you love us, and not just us, but every person you have made in this world. So help us, O Lord, to be people who embrace life in all of its incarnations, in all of its ways. Lord, help us to embrace life and try to win the hearts and minds of others who do not know you, that they may understand this gift that you've given to us. This we pray in your name. Amen.